Hi, welcome to another episode of the Genesis Family Podcast. We're super excited that you're here. We're focused here on biblically based mental health, and that is what this podcast is all about. And we want to spread that word, one, to exalt God, but in another way to actually give us practical tools that are biblically based to make sure that we actually are able to cope in an increasingly more difficult world. Today, as a guest, I have Randy Rutledge with me.
Hey.
Hi, welcome.
What's up, man?
You are a pastor at Antioch Community Church here in the Bay Area in Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your story?
I was born and raised I was born in a different state in New Mexico, but raised here in Houston. So Texan by default, grew up here in Houston and, so then after I left Houston, I went to college in Missouri, moved to Oklahoma, was in Oklahoma for 3 years and was like, hey, we're going back to Houston. Wasn't really thinking about that, but just kind of ended up that way, moved back to Houston. And so we've been here since 2012. That's just the past couple of years in our journey.
And when you say we?
My wife and I, so we have, my wife and I have been married for 17 years.
Wow.
And so we have 5 kids. And so the oldest is 15, the youngest is 8. So we had 5 kids in 7 years. It was wild. It was like an annual baby, Some people have parties annually. We had babies annually. But man, they're awesome. 2 high schoolers, a middle schooler, and then a couple younger kids, they're a blast. And so we all moved back here in 2012 and church planning we were starting a church at the time and then ended up at the church we go to now, which is Antioch, which is a great church, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. What got you into pastoring, or how do you choose that as a profession?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first time I remember even thinking about it was in this little church, this little Baptist church in Cloverleaf, just across the channel over there by I-10 on that side of town. And the church we went to, my dad actually drove a bus. And so have you ever heard of bus ministry? Church ministry, right? So we'd get up in the morning, jump in the bus with him. We'd go pick up these kids that their parents didn't go to our church, but we would pick them up. They'd ride with us. And man, when we would pick up these kids, I remember seeing, I was maybe 11 years old at the time, and I would every week, and they were so excited to come to church, but they were like just living just really bad, like kicking beer cans all out of the way to come to the church bus. And like they just, there was a level of brokenness that they were in that was just like, man, I really want these kids to come. And I remember like championing that, and feeling like, man, we'd go out on Saturday and see if all these kids are going to be there to pick up the next day. All of that. And during the middle of that, there was just this stirring in me to just help, really, which is pastoring, which is like drawing people closer to God. And so in that place was the first time that I remember having the thought of, I think I want to do this with my life.
Wow.
And then later on, as I grew a little older, maybe around like 15 or so, is when I was like, hey, I'm going to go to a Christian Bible school, and I'm going to be a pastor. That's what I wanted to do. So that decision was probably around like 15 years old. And that's what I did. That was my plan. That's how it all kind of started for me.
So you stuck with the plan that you created when you were 15 years old.
Yes.
That's amazing. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I was like pretty sold out for it. I was like, man, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And
Did you feel like you got or was there a specific moment where you feel you got a specific confirmation from God? Like, yes, this is what I'm calling you to? Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. So, with church, a lot of times you have youth camp. Youth camp is like the place where everybody, they get saved again.
You hear that all the time.
They get saved again. You hear it all the time. So
that is the place to be.
And I remember being no different, and struggling. Being 14 is tough. You know what I mean? So it's struggling and knowing, hey man, God has something for me, but I'm not sure what it is. And I just wanted to follow wherever he had at that point. And it was at church camp where I just remember being in that state of like, I don't know, complete surrender of like, I don't have to do that. Cause I kind of had some other thoughts of what I might want to do. It's like, so I was 15, about to turn 16. And I was like, man, I don't know for sure if this is it. But I decided at that moment, I was like, hey, I'm in. I'm going to take the next step, you know, and like, and then wherever it leads from there. And it just felt like it was something that just God opened the door, because college and all of that wasn't in my family's radar. Like that was not, nobody in my family had went to college, or like that was not a thing.
Wow. So this was truly a whole new world.
A whole new world. Yeah, completely. Like actually most of my family, I would say a large portion of my family didn't graduate high school. Right.
Wow.
So like there was not that.
So not only was this whole theological route was new, but it was the entire lifestyle that was
totally different.
That is awesome.
And so it was kind of taken with a grain of salt. Like, oh, you're going to go to college and go to a Bible college and you're going to do that. Okay, yeah, let's see. And it wasn't like this drive in me. It was like, no, I said I was going to do this. It was like, you know, it's like, I'm going to do it, you know?
Yeah.
I even had to take a year off because I didn't have the money. We didn't have the money. And so I took a year off, saved up money, worked on an oil rig for a year, and went back and finished out the next 2 more years and knocked it out.
You created this whole new life. You went to a Bible college. Was that everything you ever dreamt of and more, or?
I would say, I think it was probably what I needed in the moment to have the specific type of challenge that it was, but it was not what I was expecting. You know, you think everybody there, you know, and it doesn't matter what college you go to. You can go to a seminary. It's like not everybody there has the same passion or desire that you have for the things that you want to do. You know, some people go because they're sent by their parents thinking maybe it'll make life better for them or something. You know, it's like trying to get them to stop doing all the dumb things they were doing or something. And so the college I went to was really not much different than that. And so you had some that were passionate and some that are still in ministry today, some guys and gals that I went to school with that love Jesus and they're still in ministry today. And then a vast majority that are not.
Wow. So you finished seminary school, I guess, or Bible college?
Yeah, it was a Bible college, yeah.
And you became a pastor. And you've been that for a while now. How do you feel after 17 years, I believe it is, right? Or
17 years of marriage. And then started in full-time in 2009.
Yeah, okay.
So 15 years.
15 years of ministry. How do you feel like that has changed your walk with God?
Yeah. I mean, initially, you go into student ministry, especially you go to school for that. You come in guns blazing, being young. You know, you're like, man, these kids don't even know.
I'm going to conquer the world.
Exactly. As a youth pastor, I was just like, I've got some new ideas that are just going to flip the script. And so, you know, then you realize people are broken, you know, which I mean, you know, because you're broken, you know, there's not a distinction there, but your hope is that what you're offering is going to change everyone. And so ministry, it is tiresome, you know, it's because I think there's this, you're starting to figure it out and you're starting to figure out your own life. And as you jump into ministry as a you know, post-college graduate or whatever, and there's this, I don't know, there's this tension because you desire for other people to get to that place, like hurry up and get there. And so it is challenging. It's challenging starting out, but from where it was then, the expectation then and all of that, I think now after these years and seeing even in the midst of my restlessness, really trying to do all these things, the sweetness of God was always doing things that I'd never even knew he would do, you know? Right. My ambition was nothing compared to his mercy. You know what I mean? It's like, it's really sweet to see that he's so intentional with people that I thought, man, I think we should write them off, or like they're just, you know, they're too far gone.
Right.
And he's just been so good to see life change in some of those people that were too far gone. Really, it seemed like it, but not for him, you know? And so seeing some of that now over the years, you know, judging the fruit of a ministry in just a handful of years isn't fair.
Yeah.
It really you need to get some perspective, because what God's doing in those areas are bigger than what you can see in a 5-year span or something, you know?
Sure.
So
It always gives me the feeling, and always the confirmation that that God is not a logical God.
yeah.
Like it doesn't make sense. We will never be able to fully comprehend him and understand him.
Yeah.
And when you say that, when you say that on a stage, everyone is like, yes, of course, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But then when you actually have to live that, there's this process you have to go through in understanding that a lot of the things that God will ask you to do will not make sense.
Yeah.
There are things that, logically speaking, the world will say that that's not right, or
Yeah.
you're making a mistake there. And
Yeah, for sure.
And it gives, yes, go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say, people say, hey, you need to use common sense. That's
Right.
like the way we say that.
Yes.
It's very logical. Use common sense. You need
Yeah.
common sense. The problem is God doesn't give anything that's common.
Right.
You know, if it's common sense, it probably needs to be looked at.
Right.
It's like he kind of breaks a lot of the rules,
Yeah.
rules of nature, even. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like, what does that mean with him? I think there's value and there's lessons in wisdom, but there is something that he's giving, and the establishment of his kingdom is not common.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to understand.
Right. And then yet on the other side, I think, and I think this is a constant battle that I see with many people in life groups or even in different churches. There is always this battle between, when am I hearing God?
Yeah.
And when is this my emotions that are speaking, right?
Yeah.
Because I have this crazy idea.
Yeah.
And you start it with the best of intention, and all of a sudden the bottom drops out of it. It absolutely burns. It fails. And then you start doubting and questioning, was this my emotion? Was this my own drive? Was it my own passion? Or did I make a mistake? Did I hear correctly from God? But did I make a mistake and now I've crashed and burned?
Yeah.
And it's so tricky to kind of know for sure in advance, oh yes, this was the voice of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when people come with these kinds of questions, what would you say to that? How can you discern whether you actually are hearing the voice of God or whether these are just your own emotions talking?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question there's no shortage of, right? I mean, like
Right.
I wish I could say I'm personally very confident. Everything I hear from God, I know it's from God. No, I don't. I mean, it's one of those where it's like, I trust.
Sure.
I trust him. And I don't necessarily always trust that I'm hearing perfectly, but I think what I would say is, as there's a yes in your heart for him, it's like there's a trust in him that I believe leads to a place of fruit. It's like, if you abide in me and I abide in you, you'll bear much fruit, but without me, you can do nothing. So I can do nothing without him. So if I'm, if there's two benign options and I'm trying to press in on, okay, God, which one do you want me to do? Really, there's a glorification of God factor in both.
Right.
And so I asked the question, okay, like in what way do I fulfill what you call me to do? And there's been times where I've done that and it's been really great. It's turned out great. And there's been times where I'm like, why did you lead me to this? Is like hard.
Right.
It's like way harder. But then in that, I learned some of the greatest lessons of humility. I've learned so much more from failure than I have success. And so I don't assume that God just wants me to fail, but I do think he wants him to reveal things that he's wanting to change and move and shape.
Yeah.
And that's a grace.
Absolutely.
That's a grace, because you wouldn't be the person you are. I wouldn't be the person I am. Like it is a grace from God.
That is correct.
We're able to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And I would add to that, in my life, I've seen multiple places where what I would judge as success, it can sometimes very much be a failing from God's perspective and vice versa.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you feel like you're at that lowest point in your life and you feel like everything is going wrong, that could very well be a phase where you are learning the most and where you are developing some gems of hardship, where later on in life you will be able to relate to so many different people. You will know how to climb out of darkness on multiple levels and in different occasions. And it is then so easy to say, yeah, that was the bad part of my life.
Yeah.
And then now that I feel like I've got everything together and I have a certain status in my community, or I have a certain title, or I have a certain financial income, now I am successful. Look how the Lord has blessed me.
Yeah.
And I would say that in my life, I've had multiple moments where I look back at the darkest moments and I'm like, as weird as it sounds, I say, thank you, God.
Yeah.
Because without those moments, there are so many things, even in the ministry that we do at Genesis Family on a mental health level, I never would have been able to relate to so many different people on so many different levels if I hadn't gone through that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's it's comforting to know, even in the midst of those pain points, that, it's like, you don't typically throw out the verse when somebody's really struggling, but it's a good verse. It's like, all things work together for good to those that love God and those called according to his purpose. I mean, you don't tell somebody grieving that. That's not cool, probably, but truly, like the things that, man, I don't know how this is going to work out.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to pull together. I don't know if they're going to make it, or I don't, that in those places, as surrender happens, like I can trust, I can do that. I can be like, okay. And then I get to see it unfold and the benefits of those things for years to come. I see it in my family, or I see it in others, and I see the impact in the kingdom, or whatever it is. It is a sweet thing to behold, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how long have you been at Antioch right now? Remind me.
So I've been at Antioch 2015. So what is that? 9 years.
9 years.
So 9 years. Yeah.
Time flies,
9
huh?
years. Yeah, that's wild. That's wild. Yeah.
So next year, you're going to
2015.
throw a big party
Yeah,
for
it's
your
gonna be
big 10 years.
Big 10 years, man. 10 years. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
10 years is a chunk of time. Do you notice any changes in society 10 years ago versus now from a mental health perspective? Certain issues or certain things that you see that are much more prevalent now than, let's say, 10 years ago?
There's definitely distinctions, for sure. I think I would say reaching back just a little further than that would probably be the biggest distinction, which is kind of the, there was probably in 2000 and maybe 2012 or somewhere around that time, that there was like more, I think social media kind of hit big, and the conversation began to talk openly about mental health.
Yeah.
And then, so that was the beginning of it. And then the last 10 years have been kind of just a buffet that a lot of people can pick from, it seems like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there seems to be like and it's not so much a celebration as I believe it's a good thing and a hope for awareness of, but it seems everywhere, that the change that has happened just over the past, particularly the past 10 years, I would say I've seen just a lot more of it.
Yeah. So would you say that mental health then is a new phenomenon in the church, or?
No, I mean, I would say there's distinctions that are fairly new. Like there's challenges that, they have a different social impact, or you could even say what social contagion is kind of in a different state, right? That I think is unique to just the past years, but it's really just maybe a different symptom, but the same core problem, right? That you see kind of coming to the surface.
So what is the main core problem?
Yeah, the main core problem, man. I think there is this, there's so many aspects of us as in brokenness, being broken people, trying to figure it out on our own.
Yeah.
And there's this self-sustaining narrative, like I'm going to do it myself, and I need to work on myself, and I need to do all this, that I think is isolating. And I think isolation is a part of it. When you think about core, it's like, I tend to go back to kind of the original aspect of brokenness that's hiding. It's like Adam and Eve in the garden, and the first thing Adam thinks he should do when he fails is just go hide, and not realizing that he actually has a loving God who's like, the first thing he does is go look for you, It's like kind of miss that.
Yeah.
And so I think isolation and in that broken state, without community, without Jesus, without the presence of God, there's levels of brokenness that that anyone really can fall into.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's immune to that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that things are getting worse from a mental health perspective. I do think that we see an increase in everywhere, both inside and outside the church. But obviously, the church and everyone who's in there is just a reflection as well of just people in society who are Christian. And so, because of that, we're not exempt. We're not exempt from anything in that sense. Yeah. But what you do see is that. I do think that people are speaking of a mental health crisis right now in the United States, but I would say I would even stretch that a little bit further. I'm Dutch myself, and I think this is true in all of the Western world, especially. I looked up some statistics and some studies from Lifeway, and it mentioned that, for example, that 49% of pastors say that they rarely or never speak to their congregation about mental illness. And yet that 76% of churchgoers say that suicide is a problem that needs to be addressed in their community. 76%. And where 32% of churchgoers say that a close acquaintance or family member has died by suicide. So that's almost 1 in 3.
Yeah.
And at the same time, not to be too harsh at the church, but at the same time, I do think that there is sometimes a little bit of a disparity, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, between what people feel like is reality outside versus like this picture perfect world inside the church. And to quote another percentage, 4% of churchgoers who lost a loved one to suicide say that church leaders were aware of the loved one's struggle. Only 4%. 96% says that was not the case.
Yeah.
And so it seems like there's this disparity where we come into church for hope, and because of that, it almost seems like that is a different world that does not equate to reality. Does that, would you want to respond to that?
I don't disagree with that at all. I think...
but that's a problem.
The way that I see it, everybody's fine until their house blows up. Like, everybody's good, hey, how are you guys doing? Oh, we're good, praise God, or something, It's like, everybody's great until it turns out they've been struggling with suicidal ideation for 10 years, and now they're gone.
Right.
And you're like, wait, how? I mean, and so many different other levels of brokenness. Everybody's fine until, and so there is kind of, I have seen that, I remember, there's so many situations over the years where I've seen that, where it seems like, mental health is one of those things that, if it's not discussed in any way, like it's not discussed, or you don't have a community that has authenticity as a primary, like, we're going to be authentic people.
Right.
And you can be broken and be loved, then I would say it makes sense why people would try to hide all of that. Like, I'm not going to be accepted with what I'm actually struggling with. And so I've got to hide it until it takes over. You know what I mean? It's a level of brokenness that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
I don't know if based on, I guess, my experience, I think a lot of what those statistics are saying are accurate. I think, even those that are actually more pastoral would love to know that, but people might not feel safe enough or feel like people are actually interested. Mm-hmm. Maybe they hadn't experienced those relationships. And that's why close community is really the goal too. It's not so much like pastors in churches as it is, community driven groups, family outside of family,
right,
that really carry. And I've seen tons of that. I've seen like family members that pass in like life groups, and people gather around, pray for, and then provide food and put together money and all of the aspects of that. And there's pastors in the mix, but they're not the ones that always are paid pastors, that are not always the ones leading the charge and having to do it all because they're not in their life group, or they're not in their community group or their section or whatever. Mm-hmm. But people that take ownership of that, and it feels like family, I think, that's something I've seen that actually has been really powerful.
But that's a tricky thing to create, though.
It is.
Like to actually get a movement going, to actually get to that place where different people just take a position of leadership, not because they have a title at the church or because they have they get any reward for it, whether it's finances or something else.
Yeah.
That's quite a tricky thing to start.
Yeah.
And also to add to your point, just to throw out another statistic out there, that 35% of Americans say that mental illness could be overcome with Bible study and prayer alone. Which I thought was interesting because in your response, I'm actually not really hearing that at all. I'm hearing the community much rather than just the prayer and the Bible study. Not to say that prayer and Bible study is not important. It is. Yeah. But if I'm hearing you correctly,
Yeah, I think there is there's a distinction. So, I mean, ultimately, it's the power of God. It's the move of the Spirit, and it's Jesus working through somebody that I think brings breakthrough. But the way that happens with somebody that has mental health issues, has some problems, wouldn't necessarily be, hey, they come to a service. This isn't how it functions all the time. They come to a service, somebody just prays for them, and then boom, they're good. Now, I know that happens, and I've talked to people that, man, they were struggling severe depression or anxiety or whatever, and then they had an encounter with Jesus or something. But more times than not, it's those people that tend to isolate themselves, that find themselves not being able to let go of community. You know, like they feel connected, that they actually experience a process of breakthrough in these mental health areas, as well as some of those like, hey, man, we are going to fast and pray for you for breakthrough in this. When you have a community of people dialing in for that, I believe that it can just happen. You know, like God intervenes and does some awesome things, but not to discount a process that they're going to still go through, even say they're healed. Yeah. There's still a process of recovery too. So,
yeah, I do think that when you're talking about actual, like larger mental health issues, I think it does go hand in hand also with professional care, right? Because we can't put that all into the community. Right, where the entire you good luck with that. The life group leader, here you go. This person has had 3 suicide attempts, has a major depressive disorder, and has an anxiety diagnosis on top of everything. But you guys pray and be community and spend a lot of time with each other, and everything will be okay. However, there is a relationship there. I think that these people do need professional care. I do think that's where you have therapists and mental health professionals in different ways, shapes, or forms that come in that I do believe are necessary. I do think that for Christians, it is really important that they do come from a biblical worldview. Yeah. Because if there's a disconnect there, then I think it becomes really hard. And I unfortunately see a lot of people in my field who either call themselves Christian, or they even say on their website that they are not Christian, but they are happy to receive people that are Christian, and they can help with that too, because they've studied the kids' Bible when they were younger. And it's... But you don't actually share the same faith. You don't actually have a relationship with Jesus. And I do think that there is a relationship there, especially in the field of addictions. I know there's a lot of studies that have been done where it shows that people that are plugged into churches have much quicker recovery times. People who actually give their life to Christ actually have way quicker recovery times, overcoming their addiction. Yeah. And so there is a very clear relation there where I don't think it's an either or thing, but where I think it's a comprehensive thing.
Both and, yeah. What do you think is the threshold where you have pastoral care from a group of people or pastoral staff in a church to this person that might be best for them to go to counseling? Yeah. I've seen it accompanied. And I think that actually works really well if there's good relationship, you know, where they're like, hey, they're going to counseling, but they're also meeting just for some pastoral, just listening, really, and just pastoral care. Not specifically counseling, but just being there. Do you think, what's the threshold in that?
I get that question all the time from pastors. Like, what do you think?
I want to know, because I need to know where to send them to you, Rens.
I actually think that the answer actually lies in the answer that you gave. Which is the community aspect. I think that it is one of the major primary jobs of a pastor to reset someone's compass to where they return into the community.
Yeah.
There is not a single mental health disorder where it is a better thing to retreat yourself and isolate yourself.
Yeah.
In the entire DSM-5. Like, and of course there are moments where people have to retreat or self-reflect and all of those things. And that is absolutely true. But on the long run, we are all made, in psychologically speaking, but also biblically speaking, we're made for community. We're made to have fellowship with one another. And so if you understand that, I think as a pastor, when you see people coming in, I would really encourage them to make sure that they are the connection point for that person in need, to say, okay, there are aspects. If someone has major depressive disorder and there's a lot of negative things happening in their life, making sure that they are in community at a level that is appropriate for them or feel is comfortable or acceptable enough for them, is something where a pastor could play a major role and could be a listening ear to this person with their struggles. I think on the moment that you realize that the need that they have goes beyond community, it goes beyond, oh, this just means that you need to kind of get out of the darkness, get out of the isolation, and you really, there needs to be certain rewiring of the brain, or there's actual like cognitive behavioral issues that are happening here because someone is that kind of beyond. I think that is the moment that a pastor should refer out. And that's not always a very black and white moment, is it? And it's hard to also gauge that as a pastor. Because is that something that pastors are actually trained in? I actually don't know. Is that something that the whole mental health aspect, is that something that comes up in Bible college or in trainings at all?
I mean, depending on what area you go into. So, I mean, I would say if it does, it's probably a pretty remedial process, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I took some counseling classes, things like that.
Sure.
But in psychology and all those things. But I would say there's not a lot of equipping in that to know the intricacies of what mental health is.
Right.
You know, and so it is good to know, okay, this is the point where I'm saying, hey, I think it might be good to talk to a professional, you know, and not to get you off my plate, because really what I want to do in that situation is champion them, you know, champion the breakthrough, you know, celebrate when breakthrough happens, celebrate recovery, celebrate all these things, and then have them in a process as they're in that place to stay connected.
Yeah.
You know, where I've seen people fall off of that and either not receive the help that they actually needed or start pulling away, leads to a deeper levels of that brokenness. And that's hard. That's especially genuinely just caring and wanting to be there for them and feeling kind of pushed out. It's like, man, wish that counsel, you know, professional counseling or something could have came into play for them to have another, you know, Christ-following believer kind of help lead them and guide them on the journey.
I do think it is really important for pastors, though, to connect to mental health professionals in their area to actually help them with this, right? I have a particular case, and this or that is happening. What do you think? And I think often pastors assume that mental health professionals will always say, well, they should always come in, right? Because we have a financial goal behind that or anything like that. But I think there's so many foundations, there's so many nonprofits, there's so many places that don't have a financial focus or obsession at all. That I still think it would be really valuable for pastors to get more equipped in that way, because the alternative is as well, if that doesn't happen, and if a pastor says, you know what, I think I can deal with this, I can take care of this person. There is also a risk, because if the main primary role from a mental health perspective of a pastor is the community aspect and the connect moment place there to create that fellowship. I have seen it on numerous occasions where a pastor was even successful, did quite a terrific job from a counseling perspective, sincerely impressed. But because this individual, this congregant, has shared everything, there is still a certain level of guilt and shame where they think like, you know what, the people in this community now know every single detail. So now I need a clean break. Yeah. And now I will leave that community and will very often not insert themselves into a new one. And that I do think that that is an important thing that I would always encourage pastors to think about, is not just, is this within the scope of what I think that I can handle, but with the primary job that I have, with creating the body of Christ, with keeping that body of Christ, with creating that fellowship and community, do I actually go in too deep? And through that way, actually help the isolation rather than the connection.
Yeah, I don't think that's, and I think the idea of having a, if you want to call it like a savior complex, but really it's like problem solver. I want to fix it. I want to help. Yeah. And I think more times than not, it comes from a place of a desire to help. But you're in many cases biting off more than you can chew. You know what I mean? Like you're taking on water, and then you have your own life, and now you're getting random calls, and it's like if you have a counselor, then you have from this time to this time, you have to schedule it out. With a pastor, you're like, it's their life. It's their life for me to call them.
They're on 24/7.
They're free for me to call them whenever I need them. And I think that is, there's sometimes that can be, especially because you want to be there, but you're also not willing to sacrifice everything else you have going for that one situation, that you're bringing other people in on that. And I think, some of these situations too, you don't understand fully what somebody's going through. And so over the years, when I've went through a situation, I'm like, okay, they're dealing with this. I need to research this. And so, but really not knowing a lot of counselors, and not knowing a good Christian, counselors that I would send somebody to, you kind of feel like you're trapped in a spot, and you feel kind of, you don't know what's the best way, but you just know the way that you're doing it isn't helping as much as you'd like.
Right.
And you're listening more than helping them, and that's great. You want to listen, and you're trusting for them to change, but nothing's changing. And some of those are challenging moments. That you're like, man, I need to phone a friend here. And do I have a friend that knows more about this?
Right.
And so I do think there's the bridge there between them. I mean, in the same way, if somebody's homeless, and they want to come to our church, I love that. They want to come to Life Group, I love that. But it's really hard to maintain that level of lifestyle from leaders, like we're paying for a house or paying for groceries and doing this and doing that. It's like, no, we want to bless you, but there's got to be a process and a program for you to get healthy and get well and physically have your needs met. It's like we might not be able to do that,
Yeah, and that's where I think that if churches were to realign themselves to the point where they say the main purpose that we have is community, that's the thing that we can actually offer you. Yeah. We can't offer you everything else. Sometimes we can offer finances. Sometimes we can offer even professional help that we can refer you to if you have the contacts. There are several things that are possible to do, but the main thing that we are here for is for you to get plugged into community. And getting plugged into community, often when you're in crisis, doesn't feel like that's something that's very high on your priority list. And yet I would actually argue as a mental health professional, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
It's one of the absolute biggest keys where you see even couples that are going down the drain, that are very close to divorce. Very often that strain is so heavy, that baggage that they carry of the stress to one another, the resentment, the anger, the pain, the fears, the insecurities, they're so heavy that they create this feeling of, oh, let me calm down, let me rest, let me not go to church.
Yeah.
Let me not go to Life Group tonight because it's just too much. I can't handle it right now. And those are the moments that I think you actually should go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Over and over again, that isolating perspective. And for couples that are struggling, well, we're the only one. I've done student ministry for so many years, just either on and off or full-time for a long time. And in the midst of that, so many times I've talked to students and they're like, talking about some struggles that they're having. And they're like, I'm the only one, like nobody's ever struggled ever. I'm first in line to ever struggle. I'm like, man, you have every single person that you've ever met. But it's like we've all had struggles.
But can I make a critical point on churches for that?
Yeah.
I do think that when I compare modern churches in modern society to the early church, where in the Bible it speaks of people just meeting in their homes, I do think there was much more of a mentality of let's have fellowship together. Tell me your struggles. Let's share in them. Where I do think that our Sunday service system that we have nowadays is very much fit on. There is one person speaking on the pulpit, from the pulpit, and that person is going to tell us some wisdom that we should know. And to be fair, we do need wisdom, and we do need to go through the Bible together, and there is value in that. But I would love to see Sunday services changed, where there is a different format, where, like, even in the Jewish synagogues, I love that, especially in the older days, where you would see people would read scripture, but would then retreat in smaller groups immediately in the Sunday service. So not on some like live group event later in the week, but actually would talk to each other. Yeah. And you would have to kind of include yourself. And if you didn't want to talk, you could stay quiet. But many times you would actually become a part of it. And that is some part that I do think that, gosh, I would love to see churches kind of improve on, because I do think that even though community is the main point, the fact that we've seen a decline in people being actually a part of a church is one of the reasons for that. Yeah,
and I think after COVID over the past couple of years. Have you heard of COVID before? I don't know.
I may have heard it once or twice.
It was a big thing that went through. And but during that process, people started pulling away. And I think there's a lot of people that haven't discovered again, like rediscover how to go about that, and not understanding or seeing the value. And to what you're saying about church, I think there's definitely something valid there when you look at the early church, the value of breaking bread, house to house, daily. I'm like, okay, that's an extrovert's dream. It's like, every day, let's do something every day. But it's really, it is a, and I'm up for changing too, by the way. I think what we need, is unique. And not everybody connects into the community. Some people, they feel totally, hey, look, we're fine. We don't need to be a part of that. We just want to come and kind of sit where we sit and listen to the message. And, but then there are people that are broken that really come hungry and they don't know where to go and how to connect, but they're quiet maybe or fearful. Right. And man, us consistently connecting, having things as a body that's more than just, hey, this sit in circles and sit in rows. Right. Is the language, right? We want to sit, we want to sit face to face and get to know each other. I think that's the value of Life Group. And then I think there's this, hey, we're being spurred on to good works moment too on Sundays. But I think that's a great idea. The idea of, hey, let's get together right now. Maybe there are people that are doing this. Maybe there are people that leave after church and that's what they do. They go and have lunch together and they talk about this. Maybe that should be more normalized, or do it together there. I don't know. But and it's where I would kind of hope that the most important part of a church building becomes the lobby, where before you go into the service and when you come out, that there's actually time for connection again. What did you think of the sermon? Have someone strongly disagree, and let's have a healthy discussion about it. And have that connection. And I know this is very controversial to say in 2024, but let's get a little bit offended at what someone said. Can you imagine? and just have that be okay. Rather than, this means that I now need to completely withdraw from church or get away. And it's this oversensitivity right now, right? Which correlates with the mental health crisis that we have. But I think as a society, we're getting sicker because of it. But the antidote to me is the lobby. Yeah.
Is that place of connection. Okay, we've heard someone's perspective. We heard someone who really tried to seek God and sometimes might even fail.
Yeah.
Might hear wrong, right? Like we said in the beginning of this episode, a pastor is human too and might actually make a mistake. That's okay.
Yeah.
As long as there is conversation, as long as there's opportunity to talk to this pastor and say, hey, actually, I don't really agree with that. And let me tell you why. And for people to do that amongst each other, I think that's truly the antidote to this oversensitivity, to this everything needs to be comfortable for me, or otherwise I get in panic mode.
Yeah. No, I think we tend to. Okay, I'll let you in just a little on like what it's like. So you have a message and you preach and you're going for it. And man, I want to communicate what I feel like God is wanting to say. I'm not in denial though. So I absolutely know. And like, I think sometimes I feel like the Holy Spirit is leading us to a passage or at least a thought that is going to be controversial, or it's going to be kind of like for somebody, it's going to be that thing of like, wait a second, I don't like that. That's not good.
Right.
And the point of that necessarily, I'm not talking heretical things. I'm just saying, I'm saying perspective things really is what I like to go after. I go after perspectives a lot. And in that place, I think it creates questions and it creates a process for people to press in with Jesus. And I absolutely love if somebody comes and says, hey, I don't know if that was right. I don't know. I think there's something in me that's saying, I don't have this all figured out. But when you look at scripture and you see these things, like there's some things that, they're non-negotiable, but there's some that are like, I recognize like the way I was raised, and I reckon, all these different aspects.
Right.
But when you look at it, when I'm communicating something, I love the challenge. I love that somebody should be able to be offended, but there's a difference between like, I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, but I'm not offended.
Right.
It's like, I'm okay to be offended. Maybe you're very wrong, Rens. Maybe you're wrong. I'm right. And I actually still care about you and value you. And just because you're wrong on something, or at least I see you as off just a little on something, doesn't mean you're actually a wrong person. Like I can actually trust what you say, because I've heard you say a lot of things that were so sweet and good and point me to Jesus.
Yeah, and yet I think to an extent it also explains that the mental health crisis we're seeing today. Because I was looking at different studies where I think even a decade ago, roughly 40% of Americans were still attending church on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Whereas right now that's dropped to 31% in 2023. And it's continuing to drop quite drastically.
Yeah.
Which in a span of 10 years, considering that church has been around for a few thousand years, that's a huge drop.
Yeah.
And at the same time, and there's actually been studies that have proven the correlation between these two things, where you see that the lower the church attendance is, the higher we see the number of anxiety episodes, and especially also major depression. And so there is a correlation there, right?
Yeah.
Between these two phenomenons. And in that sense, there's this complicated truth, because the obvious answer is, well, everyone should just get back into church. And let's go back in. And yet we also see a lot of church hurt there. We see a lot of people who have been looking for answers but didn't get one. Mm-hmm. I think it's also a lot of people that were expecting the pastors to know everything and to have all the answers.
Yeah.
And those are the people that you look up to spiritually.
Yeah.
And to an extent, that's fair, right? Those are the leaders of your church. Those are the people that are supposed to lead you spiritually. And what do we do with them? How do we reconnect with people? How do we change the church? Because I do think, I'm curious to your thoughts, but I do think that some changes are necessary to where we change this narrative, where we just see the number of congregants in churches decline, and where we go back to a place where we see it going up.
Yeah. I've seen that, and I've seen churches decline. And that's not necessarily always the case. There there are churches they're still fast growing churches, and there's still,
Sure.
There's a lot of big start churches that have a very big front door and then a very big back door because people just kind of go through,
Right.
like
But overall, there's more people going out than coming
in.
Let me turn the page a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking for quite a bit of time about mental health in the church and different things we've seen over the last few years. But it's not just the congregants, it's pastors too. And we have addressed it a little bit here and there. But now I have a pastor sitting on the couch with me. So I'm just curious, from your perspective, what trends do you see with pastors, their mental health, because they're people too, sometimes against contrary popular belief, but
they're actual people.
They're actual people
real.
with emotions and feelings and issues too.
Yeah.
What trends do you see on that on your level?
Yeah. Man, the enemy is sneaky, man. The enemy is sneaky. No nurse goes into a hospital room taking care of a patient and thinks, "Oh man, I'm going to get sick."
Right.
They're hopeful for that person. And in ministry, I would say it's not much different. It's I want to care, and for the most part, there's a lot of pastoral leaders that would not be they're in pastoral leadership, but they're not. Their gifting is not pastoral. Maybe they have a different set gifting, and so the pressure in the midst of all of the turmoil and in all the brokenness and even the loss. A lot of churches over this, even during the pandemic, we're going back to COVID, but even during that whole process, man, they lost family members, they lost friends. They lost tons of people in their church.
Yeah,
and it's just a heartbreaking time where it's like people are like, "Give us the answer," and they're like, "Man, I don't know," and so that is that's so true. It's like there's a lot of those pressures, and at any given point, if you talk about race, even you go down the race rabbit trail or anything like that, it's like it doesn't matter how you communicate and what you say about race. It's like it's really hard to even go there, and you can't help but get bucketed.
that's a U.S. thing, though.
That's probably a U.S. thing. Yeah.
I think in Europe that's a lot less. But yeah,
okay, good. Okay, well, let's talk about mission trips and church planning later. But
sure.
But here it's just a challenge. I mean, you communicate genuine love for people that's polarized, and you have no clue.
Right.
And so now people are leaving or mad. And I mean, this is across the board. I mean, so many people have left. But in regards to mental health, but go ahead.
Yeah, let me actually back up what you're saying with some statistics as well, because there's been quite a few studies inside churches on a psychological level as well. I was quite shocked to learn that 75% of pastors, and these are the pastors, by the way, in these studies, they did not include the Catholic Church. It's basically focused on the Protestant side, both the more evangelical side as non-evangelical, but 75% of pastors report being extremely stressed or highly stressed. 40% of pastors report a serious conflict with a congregant parishioner at least once a month. 78% of pastors were forced to resign from their church, 63% at least twice, where they keep going to different churches, most commonly because of church conflict. 80% of pastors will not be in ministry 10 years later, and only a fraction will make it a lifelong career. That's not a very promising stats for your profession, Randy.
No, I did not hear that going into college.
Right.
Did not get the memo on that one.
Goodness, we need to start praying for you.
Yeah. Hey, really though, I think that's brilliant. Let's pray for pastors. Let's pray for pastors in our city and
absolutely,
in our state.
We need to. Yeah.
Pastors that are. Man, they are in it, and they are in it with the people. First, let me say, based on those stats, I don't think it's not as impossible as it makes it sound a little bit.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
That's hopeful, because I mean, hearing that, it's pretty shocking. Actually,
right.
It's shocking. Now, I will say, I've known the majority by far of the guys that I was pretty close to in college. They're no longer in ministry. And a lot of that is, you know, like getting hurt, basically, you know, and they decided to go do a different profession.
It sounds like, not to cut you off,
Yeah.
but that taking care of your mental health should be a key priority as a pastor.
Yeah.
Because the stats don't lie. It's even another stat, on average, seminary-trained pastors last only 5 years in church ministry.
Which is different than the 10 years for the other pastors, right?
Right.
There was some that last 10 years or
Yes,
less.
that's
Or
right.
something like that. They don't last, 80% doesn't last 10 years
Well,
or
10
something
years.
like that.
Yeah, that's right.
5 years.
So it's such a, it seems to be highly correlated to mental health, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're working in the corporate world and you have a conflict with a colleague, that often does not mean that you will automatically quit. I mean, there are
Yeah.
situations, but not on these scales,
Not
with
on
these
the
kinds of
scale.
percentages.
Yeah.
And yet, and this is my theory, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, but there is this relationship that you build. That's, again, the community. It's this core primary part of you as a pastor, I think, it seems. And you build this relationship. So when you have a falling out, you don't just have a falling out with like a colleague or someone else. You're having a falling out with someone who you've built a relationship with whom you walked close, with whom you thought you agreed in values and certain views on your faith, which is a really important primary thing in your life. And it clearly does take a huge toll on pastors' mental health. Yeah.
Yeah. The biggest impact I've seen stems back to, in college, I had a professor. I was having this conversation with the professor, not specifically about mental health, but like seeing pastors struggle and all these things. And hey, don't they have friends? You know, talking about pastors and being lonely.
Yeah.
And I asked him, don't they have friends? And he said, no, they can't have friends. Like this was the lesson from a professor in college, was they cannot have friends. You can't have friends in your church. You need to have friends outside of your church, because the expectation that you can communicate frustration, disappointments, or even struggles to people in your church is not going to work out well for you. And I thought, well, then it's probably not going to work for me, because I can't like live in community people and feel like I'm not being authentic. Like I just can't. It feels so slimy to just be like, man, we're struggling. And nobody knows, like, who do I tell? You know, like, who can walk with me in this? And I think there's an aspect of expecting pastors to be above it all, that their marriages take the toll.
Yeah.
You know, their kids have this ridiculous amount of pressure to be perfect or something. And it's more than what, it's more, so I get the pastors leaving some, because it's like, man, if my kids were feeling what a lot of these pastors' kids feel, like they were feeling that.
Gosh.
I could imagine being like, I've got to get them out of this.
Let me back up. Let me back up what you're saying as well, because I've actually done studies on what you're saying right now, what your professor said as well. 70% of pastors say they have a lower self-esteem now than when they entered ministry. 70% fight constant depression.
70%?
Yes, sir. 77% feel that they do not have a good marriage.
Holy cow.
We have a problem here, sir. 41% display anger problems in their marriage, reported by their spouse who are in ministry. 80% of ministry spouses feel left out and unappreciated in their church. 80%. And to just keep the stats coming, and I'm sorry I had better news, 50% admit to using pornography, and 37% report inappropriate sexual behavior with someone in the church. And quite frankly, recently we've heard quite a few different people from major churches, renowned churches, in fact, worldwide, where one after the other sexual related scandal comes out, and all of a sudden you see that these stats are very, very real.
Yeah.
65%, and this goes back to your last point, feel that their family is in a glass house.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a few more. 53% of pastors do not feel that seminary or Bible college prepared them adequately. 70% do not have someone that they consider a close friend.
70%
of pastors. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
50% do not meet regularly with an accountability person or group. And I was shocked when I heard that last one, for example, because I'm thinking, isn't this why pastors have elders? Why, like, don't you guys meet?
Yeah.
Aren't the elders, and maybe this is a very dumb question, but aren't they supposed to be the people that kind of you guys are accountable to, but that also walk alongside you guys, that give you guys pushback, that you know, tickle you a little bit in your thoughts or your ideas? Isn't there fellowship there at that level? Why it seems so incredibly lonely up there?
Yeah. Yeah. Once again, I don't disagree that that's how it is. I've seen that played out, you know. I think there are places in communities that take note of things like this and make an intentional deep dive into making sure families are taken care of, that husbands are faithful, that there's accountability. And so, I mean, so there's like multiple with Antioch in particular.
Sure.
And I know a few other churches that have this level of connection, but there's multiple groups. So not just as a staff, although we do meet as a staff, like the guys meet as a staff and have accountability and pray for one another and all those kind of things. But we also have that. I have that with guys from my life group. And then I have another group that I just really like to be with because they're just good friends.
Right. A men's group.
Yeah, just a men's group. Just a guys group that's
awesome.
Like, hey, what are you learning in the Word, man? Send me that podcast or whatever, you know?
That is so cool.
And so there is an aspect of that. Now, some of the statistics about you know, how their families feel and how their marriages feel, the pressure there is one of those where families, like, they're the one counseling people, and now they need counseling. And I think every Christian family needs to have another couple that speaks into their marriage. Like, they need to have other people in their life that speak and like can listen and hear. And there's not like this, like, you know, like this. There's not a judgment there, just like there wouldn't be if it was anyone else.
Right.
You know, and having friends is great in the body. Like, we want to have friends.
Sure.
And I would say I find that very interesting about not having that many friends. But I believe there's a call to family. I really believe, like, there's this familial kingdom message that a lot of pastors are terrified because it means they have to change the game when it comes to authenticity. They think that their family is being scrutinized, but there's so many things also hiding as well, and that they're not seen. And so because of that, you know, like, okay, I'll say it like this.
It sounds like you're almost creating darkness then, rather than creating the light.
You're creating an expectation. So if my message is perfect and our band is on point and they don't miss a note,
Right.
they are perfect.
Yeah.
And the slides we use are done with perfection. And when they walk in the door, the most perfect people are greeting them. And every experience they have in our church is perfect. Then what do they expect from their pastoral leadership? Perfection. It's not. It would seem like that. You set yourself up. I mean, I'm not saying let's do it halfway. Let's just put thumbtacks and banners. Let's do it halfway. Let's just skimp on the music. I think people do it with passion. But the idea of we're putting a product out there, it's going to be really good, which means I'm going to be really good, is just totally non-biblical perspective. It's like that's not healthy for pastors. We're creating an expectation of ourselves that we're never going to be able to fulfill. Like,
right.
It's not in the books for me. You know, it's not in the books for my family. Like, I cannot and will not put an expectation of perfection on them, or, hey, you need to dress really nice for this because it's Sunday and you put your best before the Lord. It's like, no. I mean, like, we dress like we want to, but then we don't have like a Sunday garb. You know, I'm just not into that. That's not my thing, you know, and or just a number of other things. But I think that level of pressure impacts families. And and has some of them. I mean, when you have turmoil with your kids too, you can imagine the 80% or however the 70% of couples that are struggling. It's like, yeah, there's a cascading effect of broken expectations and, you know, all the different aspects that lead into some of the brokenness that people feel in ministry. Like ministry and mental health plays a huge role in how people cope in that place.
Yeah.
Do they cope with anxiety? Do they cope with depression? Do they cope with addiction? Do they, you know, are they narcissistic? You know, like there's a lot of things.
But there is also this shame and guilt component to it.
Yeah.
Where I feel that a lot of pastors also feel reluctant to share this, even in their church.
Yeah.
With people like, hey, we're really struggling with this, because it makes them feel like they're no longer, they can speak from a place of authority, or they can speak of a place of like, listen to me.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're struggling, then you should not be in a position to speak. I don't think that is true at all, but I do think that there's a strong stigma there. And because that stigma is there, I think that there's a lot of pastors who do not share what's really going on. And then it goes back to exactly the same behaviors as we were talking about when we were talking about people just who are congregants. Yeah. That then all of a sudden you find that 10-year-long marriage that has been in crisis for that amount of time.
Yeah.
Which then absolutely either explodes or implodes, and no one saw it coming. And in how many churches haven't we seen splitting? How many churches have we not seen collapsing? How many times have we not seen this happen?
Yeah.
And how many times does it still need to happen until we actually all have a hard look at ourselves, both congregants and pastors, and say, guys, we need to change this. We need to really stop being a museum for good people. Where like, lean on me because I know how to do this. And that mentality, which I think that is a way more sinful, if we want to use that word, a way more sinful mentality rather than the mentality of like, oh, that anxiety or that depression is the sin. Because it creates, and the word sin, I use the word sin on purpose here because it creates this guilt and shame feeling when you talk about sin. Oh, that's something you're not supposed to do. Yeah. That's something that installs guilt and shame. And that's exactly what we need to take away. That is, to me, is the demonic part. And I use that word with intention because that's exactly what isolates us. And this is what we're seeing, is that the people that are so isolated, that are so in need of the church, are being led by pastors who are going through the exact same thing.
Without even knowing, yeah, without even knowing.
And then these amazing souls that all are called by God to lead and pastor churches have to take all of that weight of all of those people who have those same struggles on their shoulders because they're not sharing it with others. And we're surprised that so many churches split and implode. It's really not surprising when you think about it. So how do we change this?
Yeah. Awareness. This podcast is going to change it. I do think awareness, though, I think, you know, in the life of a church, there needs to be those moments of asking the question, how are we doing? And what are we doing? You know, like, how are you doing personally and what are we doing? And let's recenter. You know, it's like your family, my family, just a little bit off trajectory. And we don't even know where we ended up. And, you know, leading a church body and having people that are attending and those that are apart and those that are just visiting, all those aspects, there needs to be this consistent coming back to. And the times I've seen, you know, like we have had no shortage of, you know, like people frustrate with us or people leave and all these different things, and honor them, bless them, you know, like let Lord bless them. But the idea is that we need to, in that place, say, okay, Lord, let's go back to let's dig the ancient wells again. Lord, what have you called us to? And we're not going to back away from that. You know, it's not for everybody. Praise God. Find another community. We don't advertise, you know, like I mean, maybe t-shirts, like we have t-shirts for different events and stuff, but like
you guys have a website too, right?
We have a website. So I guess, yeah, maybe, but the idea that we're like, hey, we're open for business. Please come here. Just like, no. Like the motivation should be different. And I think being real with people we care about that lead us. So I would say, like, I personally love, like, all of our pastors on staff. They're fantastic at our church. But I think as a whole, pastors across the country or even our own city, it's like they need people who care about them, who love them, who say, hey, I think you need to press in here. You need to press in here. And I love seeing pastors of churches that say, yeah, I mean, and surely there's some hurt there too, you know, that, like, pastors have been hurt. But with a humble heart, say, I'm willing to press in. Like, I'm genuinely willing to grow and change. Let me recognize where my heart's at. And if I need help, I'm going to leave and I'm going to get help. And with love, go, heal, heal. Because it's hard. It can be hard.
Yeah.
And we can't be in denial that pastors need that. They need, they need rest. I mean, for us personally, like, I take like an actual day of prayer, like a day, just prayer, just rest. And, like, mentally, that's fantastic. That's, like, super helpful. It's like, okay, I'm not working on a bunch of things. I'm actually just going to spend like a retreat day kind of thing and go to there's a place it's like a Catholic monastery or something. It's a silent retreat place. Like, go to the silent retreat place and just spend the day and get into that perspective of, okay, Lord, what do you want to work on in me? And then talk to people I care about if there are things as well. So awareness, community, still not following some of these statistics, like, I'm going to make it a point to actually care so deeply and be so authentic that people are not surprised when I say, hey, look, we actually need some help.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not isolated. That might not always be the case for some, but.
No. I do think that the only way to actually achieve that, this utopia that I think we're almost describing, is if we actually start to learn more about Jesus again.
Yeah.
Because I think that even though the primary function of a church from a practical point of view would be the community, to be the body of Christ, we still have to be the body of Christ, though. Mm-hmm. I think that if you're just coming to church to find the community, and this may sound weird after everything that we just said, I don't think you'll make it either. I think it'll become a very cultural thing to just go to church on Sunday if you don't actually come to church with that heart of, I need to find Jesus.
Yeah.
I think if that's your heart posture, you're going to find a lot of people that will be looking for exactly the same thing. And then that is what connects the community, right? Rather than I'm looking for community or I feel lonely. So because of that, I'm going to go to a church to get my needs met for social connection. Because then I would argue that a bar might be almost just as effective. Yeah. And yet a church in combination with your own heart posture has such a different thing to offer. And I would argue a much better thing to offer than that bar.
Yeah, no, Cheers, where everybody knows your name, kind of like church, They're almost glad you came, or maybe they're glad you are. I don't remember. It's a long time ago, but churches tend to function like, hey, are we here for the people? Are we here for the broken? Are we here for the Christians? Are we here for Jesus? Those are like the three models for church that I've seen. I mean, like, we're here for our church. We're here for our Christian friends. Or, hey, we're very evangelical, very passionate about the gospel. We preach the gospel every week. And if you're not saved, you need to bring all your friends to our church. So that's one. And then we are here to worship Jesus. And I think the Lord can actually be glorified in all three of those aspects as they intertwine and work throughout a church. But
sure.
I tend to lean towards, hey, look, I want people to be drawn together to be here for Jesus because they're going to glow so bright. It's like you don't advertise a fire. People are cold. They come out of the woodwork. You just burn with heat for Jesus, and people from everywhere are going to come. And so when it comes to motivation, it's like some people don't know why they're there. It's like, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here and God has something right now. And so there is that, but there's just a tension sometimes between those different things, between those different three perspectives of, hey, what kind of church are we going to be? Are we going to go to just be here for Jesus? But I do believe it's like, you know, it's so easy to say Jesus is the answer, but really discovering the more of him as he reveals the more of who I am. Like, he loves to reveal who he's called me to be. And I can have confidence in that place to where I'm not trying to put on a show, and I'm not trying to falsely engage. Hey, so glad you're here, but not really. You made me mad last week because you sent me an email because I wasn't wearing a mask at Walmart or something, you know, whatever, you know, it's like, okay, you know, something like that, you know, and, but genuinely engage and genuinely love. I have to be fearful of not doing those things or being seen as that if I really know solidly who Jesus actually has called me to be, you know, so there's a stability there.
Yeah.
That sometimes it's like it can get washed. It feels like it tries to get washed away. It's a scheme of the enemy to wash a lot of that away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Randy, final question to you. At Genesis Family, our slogan is restoring the family unit, specifically to God's original design. What needs to happen from your perspective to restore the family unit back to God's original design?
Yeah, man, that's great. That's a really good question. You know, as I think about it, I think there's an openness to the power and move of God that reveals a yes to people. Like, I believe it's happening to families. That's like, there's so many things outside of our control. But man, there is the Spirit of God that is releasing a yes into family. And I believe fathers rising up and mothers rising up and stepping into those places of spiritual governance over their home and over their family. You know, so many things, you know, whether it's, you know, you could look at generational curses and all these different things, but there is there's an invitation for all of that to be broken off in the presence of Jesus. And I believe the yes to God, the yes to Jesus and his presence, as it reveals the truth of who he's made people to be, I think families will be joining together. I think families will be reunited. And a lot of these things, man, just so you know what I'm believing for. So I'm believing to where, like, anxiety is a thing they talk about, like, not knowing what it is, you know, like, I mean, I believe ridiculous. Like, what are you talking about?
Amen.
Anxiety is so far in the past that, like, that we don't even know those feelings. We don't even know those thoughts. I'm believing for God's kingdom to come and be established where those things have been passed. They're not passed down. The Spirit of God is passed down to the next generation. And so believing big, bro. I'm believing big for it. But it's him and his power that wants to work in the families, reuniting, drawing together and empowering with the Spirit and seeing that kingdom come to pass on the earth, man. Believing for it, bro.
Randy Rutledge, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Thanks, bro.
Awesome.
Yeah.